In December of 1954, millions of children across the United States sat on the floor of their living rooms and stared into a glowing box. They were waiting for Walt Disney's newest miniseries, Davy Crockett, Indian Fighter. The response was overwhelming. Parents rushed department stores, dropping an estimated $100 million on coonskin caps, toy muskets, and bubblegum. Merchants even marketed Crockett-branded hot dogs. The obsession moved from the toy aisle to the radio. The Ballad of Davy Crockett received so much airplay that 4 different versions of the 20-verse song hit the Billboard pop charts at the same time. Even the United States military adopted the brand. The Army named a new tactical nuclear weapon system, a recoilless rifle, after the folk hero. Curious, this level of saturation goes beyond the normal life cycle of a popular television show. It was a sudden national fixation. And it forces us to ask, why did mid-century America need this specific hero so badly? The early 1950s were a period of national disillusionment. The Korean War had recently ended in an unsatisfying stalemate, costing 36,000 American lives and fracturing the country's sense of military invincibility. Domestically, the public was waking up to a terrifying reality. The looming threat of nuclear annihilation created a pervasive, paralyzing anxiety in everyday life. To cope with these overlapping terrors, the public sought out an antidote. They needed a comforting symbol of rugged victory, someone who always won, no matter the odds. But the comet-taming, alligator-wrestling savior they chose, the legendary Davy Crockett, never actually existed. Davy was a carefully engineered political character. He was created over a century earlier by a real, flawed, and principled man named David Crockett, and his story illustrates the high price of a personal brand. The foundation of the myth was built on genuine hardship. David Crockett grew up in poverty in northeastern Tennessee. Before he was 12, his father declared bankruptcy, and David was sent off as an indentured runaway, learning to survive the brutal frontier. When he eventually parlayed his local reputation into a seat in the United States Congress, he faced a severe culture shock. The educated, urban elites in Washington looked at the backwoods newcomer and treated him like a running joke. Instead of fighting the stereotype, Crockett leaned in. He recognized that delivering an entertaining, folksy tall tale won him more popularity and votes than giving a dry policy speech. He began to weaponize the caricature. He endorsed stage plays modeled on his life and ghost-written almanacs that wildly exaggerated his exploits. Suddenly, he was the man who could wring the tail off a comet and kill 105 bears in a single season. David was no passive subject of regional folklore. He actively engineered his own myth to secure and maintain political power. But a rift was forming. While the fictional Davy was an untouchable superhero, the real David was a stubborn man anchored by a deep set of personal principles. Those principles were put to a major test in 1830, when President Andrew Jackson introduced the Indian Removal Act. To oppose the bill was an act of extreme political risk. Jackson was popular and had been Crockett's commanding officer in the military. Yet David broke entirely from his own political party, stood alone, and cast his vote to say no. He knew his constituents in Tennessee supported the removal, but he justified the rebellion by declaring his primary duty was to his God and his conscience. The consequences arrived immediately. This act of rebellion cost him his seat in Congress and ended his political career. The irony is clear. The uneducated frontiersman mask hid a politician who was capable of rare, self-sacrificing integrity. With his political prospects finished, David headed west to a crumbling San Antonio mission. If he arrived simply as David, he might have slipped over the wall to survive the siege. But he was trapped by his success. The myth required him to stay. And so, on March 6, 1836, the Mexican army overran the fort. Crockett was killed fighting a battle he knew he could not win. David died at the Alamo because the alter ego he built had left him no other choice. His death permanently severed the folk hero from the real man. Untethered from reality, the Davy Crockett myth grew even wilder over the next century. Which brings us back to the 1950s. Walt Disney recognized the power of this folklore, engineering a resurrection of the myth to sell comfort to a fearful generation. That is the core function of folk heroes. They act as cultural mirrors, reinvented to soothe whatever anxieties a society is facing at the time. The tall tales of Davy Crockett still give us a symbol of rugged individualism. But the true story of David Crockett, the politician who tanked his career rather than violate his conscience, provides a valuable blueprint for standing alone.